Good afternoon, Faith. Steve here with your daily devotion. And one thing I like about this daily devotion, or at least this week's daily devotion, is that the preaching pastors get to present to you any verse that they so choose that they found encouraging in the Gospel of John. And so I get to share with you any verse that I want and why it was encouraging to me. And it occurred to me while I was doing this, because I picked a passage in John chapter 20, that for me, a passage doesn't have to be... it doesn't have to have an application in order for it to be encouraging to me. Like sometimes passages are just awesome, right? It's super encouraging because they give me more insight into who Jesus Christ is. All right, backstory. My family and I, we watched a Pixar movie recently. It was a movie called Onward. And in this movie, there's a boy who never really got to meet his dad. Or maybe he was a baby when his dad passed away. And so... Anyway, the story unfolds, and at one point in time in the story, the kid, he's a teenager, 16 years old, he runs across an old friend of his dad's. And he discovers this. And that friend tells, the kid, he goes, you know what? One thing I'll always remember about your dad is how bold he was. He always wore these purple socks. I mean, they were loud, and he just didn't care. And I always looked up to your dad, and I admired him for that because he was a bold man. And the kid, you could just see him, like he's just taking in this detail about his dad. It's like an insight. It's a detail that he'd never known before. And because he misses his dad so much, like these are the kinds of details that he treasures. And as I was reading John chapter 20, so I have that in my mind, as I was reading John chapter 20, there's a detail about Jesus that's like this. And I don't know that it has an application, but when you read about this detail, it just gives you more insight, maybe into Jesus in terms of his personality, but at least, or minimally, into the resurrection and kind of what happened on that morning when his body was resurrected from the dead. Let me go ahead and read that to you. I'm going to take this from John chapter 20, and I'll begin in verse 6. Then Simon Peter came, following him, that is John, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. All right, so I was just thinking about, Jesus on that morning when he was resurrected. Now, he would have been wrapped in grave cloths, almost like a mummy. Like they would have been wrapped around his body, and the women were going out to prepare the body further for, final burial, and they're going to put spices and stuff. And, anyway, but Jesus would have been wrapped up tight. And so on that morning, like you just kind of think, you just use your imagination, like what did that look like when life came back into Jesus's body? Right? They start wiggling around a little bit. Was there this light or radiance or glory shining through these linen cloths? I don't know. But, he got out from those cloths, and I can imagine him sitting up. And the text says right here that these linen cloths were just lying all together in a heap on the floor. And then you get the impression that Jesus took his time, unraveling this face cloth from his head, and he takes that and he folds it up neatly and puts it down off to the side in a place by itself. And again, it gives me the impression that Jesus took his time with it. I just picture him sitting there in that tomb, just anticipating the day. Right? Like I imagine the stone had been rolled away from the tomb, and I can, the cold air from the morning, coming through, coming into that tomb, and I imagine a big smile on Jesus' face. It was springtime, and the birds outside chirping, and Jesus just anticipating what that day was going to be like, and probably couldn't wait to see his disciples and their response to his resurrection. But I love that detail about the folded burial cloth that it was around his head. It makes me think Jesus was probably a pretty neat guy, putting things in their places and folding up things and putting them down nicely. That might be extrapolating too much, but who knows? But I just love that detail about the life of Jesus. And I think also it's a detail that you're only going to know if you really study the life of Jesus, right? Like when you love him, it's like you cherish these small details about his life. Details like, hey, Jesus, you folded your face cloth. Anyway, that was an encouraging detail to me, just to see that for the first time and for that to stand out to me. And my hope for you, Faith, is that you're digging into the Word for yourself and that you might find many other details like this that give you a window into Jesus, his personality, his life, his death, his resurrection. Well, thanks for joining me today.